Hello, it's Jack Sweeney, and I'm attending Sage Intacct's Advantage Conference this week in Las Vegas, and I've caught up with Paul Burrin, who is today Vice President of Product and Marketing for Sage People. I had connected with Paul in an earlier life at an HR Tech conference where I had quizzed Paul on a number of different human capital workforce topics, which at the time he always came back with some really interesting insights. Paul, one of the observations I shared with you earlier that I was hoping to explore a little more with you now was that during our CFO interviews, I will frequently perhaps ask a workforce-related question of a finance leader, and the finance leader will quickly point out that they perhaps lead HR, or the HR person, reports to them. And however, if I dig a little deeper and I ask them about, what are your priorities when it comes to the workforce, the answers are not as always information rich. Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about that because it seems to me that many finance leaders are not as advanced or are not taking as much of a leadership role as they are maybe in other areas, such as customer engagement and measuring the customer experience. When it comes to the workforce, they're not quite as advanced. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing some thoughts on my observation.
Well, I think, first of all, you raise a really interesting point, which came out in our discussion, as to some CFOs really are well connected with HR and understand some of the ongoing operational issues within HR, others less so perhaps. But I think that what is really quite interesting, Jack, is that there's a fundamental change that's happening within HR itself. Instead of HR just being focused on HR processes and trying to effectively operationalize those and using software to do that, there's a bigger fundamental shift going on in business, which is less about worrying just about HR transactions, but more about worrying about your employees and really providing an environment where your employees can thrive. Now, why is that so important? Well, it's so important for a number of reasons. First of all, if you're providing really great experiences in the workforce and the workplace, you are going to get people more motivated, better engaged, and your performance goes up. But equally important, that also provides positive feedback in the marketplace. We all know about platforms like Glassdoor and other social platforms where people can talk freely about companies that they're working in and how they feel about it and whether it's a good place to work. The reason that's important is it affects your employer branding, which means really, are you an attractive company when it comes to competing for talent? Do people actually see your business as somewhere they want to go, and therefore you're in a better position to find, source, acquire, and hire really good people? And if you're providing those great experiences, you're likely to be able to retain them, which goes full circle then to things like, costs and efficiency and things that a CFO may matter from a finance point of view, but may not necessarily be considering from a broader business point of view.
I would make the assumption that employee churn is the primary number that finance leaders probably turn to when they're discussing the health of the workforce or the health of the workforce mindset, let's say.
Well, it's certainly one of the key ones. Clearly, if you're not able to retain good people, then that's a problem in itself. But also, you may have a situation where you can't find and hire good people either, for various reasons. But a lot, in turn, then comes back down to, well, how much visibility does a CFO have of the workforce that they actually currently have? And I'll give you an example. We have a customer now, before they use Sage People, that have been growing fast. They're in a number of different countries. They're in the software space, and they basically, it would take them weeks to be able to do a simple headcount analysis, or just understand, how many people have I got working in different parts of the world. They also started to realize they'd got a churn problem, and they didn't know exactly what the reasons were, but it was about 40%. Well, if you're a small business trying to grow fast and you've got a retention issue where 40% churn, clearly that's a big problem. So the issue they had is, well, how do we go about understanding what's going on? And this is where they were able to use Sage People in this case to be able to understand, first of all, well, where their headcount was, how many people they had where, but more critically, they could then start drilling down. And they really identified two key problems. The first problem was in India, where they got a large number of millennials that were working for them. But the challenge at the time in India was that a lot of software companies were hiring. There was a lot of competition for talent. And it was quite common for somebody maybe to join a company or appear to sign up to join a company, only to find that they either stayed a very short period of time or didn't even show up at all when the start date happened, because they'd been offered, a better job down the road for, additional 10% or whatever. So that was the first problem they identified. The second problem they identified was actually in Europe, where they were starting to realize that they got a larger number of their employees were beginning to retire, and they weren't in a position to really understand, the fact they were seeing natural attrition, if you will, because people were retiring, and therefore they not only had a headcount problem, but they'd also got a skills issue. And so they were in a much better place then to come up with policies to address both of those problems.
Paul, we're already up to our third question, so I'm going to have to ask you to once more look into the future, which I know you're very good at doing. And just from the point of view of the finance leader and the metrics that are important to them, is there a metric perhaps that finance leaders, you would expect finance leaders to be using more in the future when it comes to the workforce, measuring the workforce, whether it's the mindset, the performance, whatever it might be?
It's a really good question, because clearly metrics is pretty fundamental. I think that there's an opportunity for anybody now looking at HR metrics to think in terms of both lead and lag metrics. Many metrics are lag, but lead metrics may be more around things like succession planning or looking more into the future and being able to understand things like, well, where have I got skills gaps? Where have I got talent issues that I need to address, and I need to be thinking ahead, and I need to be starting to plan now for that. Equally, having said that, I think the CFO also has to be on top of, well, where are they now with hiring? I mean, hiring in particular is critical for smaller businesses. And again, if you're trying to grow fairly quickly, if you're not able to hire quickly, if you've got problems in terms of, your pipeline, or you're not closing the hires out and getting them on board quickly enough, they can be real challenges. Interestingly, in some recent research that we did, the whole onboarding issue turned out to be one of the most critical problems that HR leaders have identified. So again, understanding things like time to hire, time to skill, time to value are also key metrics that the CFO might be interested in looking at.
Paul Burrin, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.